College football nerds, here to discuss our top 10 for the week. There's absolutely no games of interest this week. We struggled to come up with, what previews to do, and we like putting out content for y'all and talking football. So this week we want to do our top 10, but in the context of giving y'all some thoughts on the season so far and how these teams are looking. We did a rant video on Texas slipping to 12th after their game against LSU, and we're not Texas fans, but we think that is absolutely asinine. We take the AP voters to task, so make sure you check that out. Also did a review on the LSU-Texas game as well. Josh, let's talk about our top 10, and I think there's probably going to be some people that accuse us of being LSU homers. We've already kind of discussed where each of us has our top 10. Why don't you start us out with your number one team, and we'll go from there.
My number one team, as of right now, is LSU. And to me, when you talk about what our top 10 is and how you define, best teams, is it quality? Is it how you earn it? To me, it's a combination of the two, because I look for the best teams in the field, but I don't think you can determine someone's the best team on the field unless they've earned it by actually beating good teams to show that they're a good team. One of the reasons our model, when it comes out in a few weeks, has generally been quite accurate is the fact that our model assumes that when you play teams at or above a certain quality threshold, that things change, right? When you play a top 10 team, all of a sudden your 8 yards per play offense can crater to 4 yards per play. And when you play a team that's outside the top 40 or outside the top 50, your offense that generally puts up 30 yards per game in a weak conference can go skyrocketing. LSU showed both things that I want to see. They played at a very high level. I see a defense that is loaded in the secondary, has extreme athleticism with DeFinity and Queen and guys at linebacking spot. They have great linemen. I think Rashard Lawrence is a very high-quality lineman. Chason gives them the ability to rush the passer. And then offensively, they've got a ton of weapons. Burrow looks extremely good. In his best game last year, he struggled to cross the 50 to 60% threshold, and now he's doing that consistently. He's making really quick, accurate decisions. I think he's just a lot more comfortable in this offense, frankly. They have an excellent receiving core. I think the offensive line still needs a little bit of work, but they're still good, and they've gelled. And I think at the running back position, I've said before, I don't think Edwards-Helaire is necessarily elite, but I think Emery probably is. And my point is, if that's the weak point right now, it's not bad. And I think they're only going to get better at that position. So overall, I think LSU is my clear number one.
LSU is also my number one for a lot of the things that you just said. My one concern with LSU is different from yours. I do think Emory's going to come on throughout the year, and they're going to show that they're a pretty good run team as well. I think Burrow's going to fall back to earth a little bit. We discussed that in our review of the Texas LSU game, but I also think the defense is better than it showed. My one concern is they are relying on Chason a lot for pass rush. And we said this the last year. They didn't have a great pass rush. I didn't see a pass rush that I was overly impressed with against Texas. I do think some of that had to do with the heat. I think they have, and we'll go into my second team, I think they have the reverse issue of what my second team has. Right now, I'm concerned with the defensive line depth for LSU. I'm not concerned with their secondary at all. But I am concerned with defensive line depth, pass rush capability. For Alabama, the reason they're not number one is I think that they've got some question marks on offensive line. I think that obviously that's the one thing that gels the most throughout the season. But until I see it, I'm not putting them in that number one slot. We know who they are. We know who Tua is. We know who Alabama is in general. We know they're a great team. But one, they haven't been able to show it by beating the crap out of a really good team. They've played a couple of, cupcakes to start the season, but they have taken care of business. But that game this Saturday, even the game against Duke, they were a little clunky. Offensive line, I didn't love. Defense, I think they got the best defense in the country. Everybody's going to talk about LSU secondary. Alabama's got right now, they've got 3 first-rounders in their secondary right now. So I think that with the emergence of Terrell Lewis, I think they've got the best defense in the country, especially since they're getting great linebacker play from their freshmen. So that's my number 2. Give me your number 2.
It's the same team. It's Alabama, and pretty much for all the same reasons you just gave. I think defensively right now, I think overall they're probably the best unit in the country. And again, same reasons. I think they have a lot more defensive line depth than probably LSU does. I don't know that the secondary is quite as good as LSU, but it's extremely good now that they're healthy. The freshman linebackers have shocked me in what I've watched from Alabama because they are far better than I was expecting them to be. I do agree with you. My concerns for Alabama is that they're not running the ball well. They're not really protecting Tagovailoa. He's doing really well because they've been playing weak teams, and those teams aren't really teams that can generate that much of a pass rush. The receivers are phenomenal. There's the tools there to be successful offensively, but right now it's not all put together. And if they were to struggle in a game, I would say people would probably blame Tua, and it'd be wrong. The issue for Alabama is the offensive line is letting too many pressures, and they're not getting any push in the run game. That may gel, and that may completely change my viewpoint. I know they have a suspended left guard, and when he comes back, maybe they're a different team. But as of right now, that offensive line is a weak link for Alabama that would cause them significant issues. And I think LSU would probably win a close game with Alabama. Of course, that does leave into the other team that normally is in the top two that neither one of us has listed.
Yeah, I've got Clemson number 3, and Clemson fans are going to freak out right about now. They're going to say 44-16. They're going to tell me that, they handled Texas A&M, but there's a couple of things here. One, back to our discussion of how we rank these. I rank based on if I put these two teams on the field right now, who do I think would win? I do not think right now Clemson would beat Alabama or LSU. And I've got numbers to back it up. Trevor Lawrence has not been great this year, and we did give them the benefit of the doubt with our A&M preview in saying that Clemson is notorious for holding things back, and they're going to, show that the offenses can do what it wants against A&M, especially against that secondary. A&M's defense is razor thin on depth, and they were dropping like flies against Clemson, and Clemson still only put up 24 points. Now, a lot of this might be because A&M, they knew early on that A&M wasn't going to do anything offensively. But if you put Alabama or LSU on the field with that A&M team, as bad as Mon was playing, look, Mon played out of his mind last year against Alabama, and they still lost by like 30 points. I can't imagine right now the game that, and this was their Super Bowl for the year until the playoffs because they don't play anybody else the rest of the year. I can't imagine Alabama or LSU having a smaller margin of victory against either two of these teams that Clemson's played so far.
I also have Clemson number 3, and it's for the same reason. I mean, still think Clemson's a very good team. Part of the problem, and fans of a lot of teams struggle to hear this sometimes, it's, being number 3 does not mean you're bad, and it doesn't mean that anyone's bashing you. That just means that you're not as good as number 1 or number 2, and you're better than the other 127 teams in college football. Right now, Clemson is a very, very good team. They made a lot of things look good easy against Texas A&M. They still won 24-10, which wasn't a huge spread. I know there was a late backdoor cover by Texas A&M, but Clemson did not. When you say didn't cover in that game, to me, I'm just sort of saying Clemson didn't really meet expectations. Trevor Lawrence, 7.7 yards per attempt is not a particularly great day. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And I thought maybe even more notable to me is A&M's run defense is pretty much completely being rebuilt. They suffered major injuries in that game, and ETN still averaged 3.3 yards per carry. And when Clemson has played elite teams, be it Alabama or Notre Dame, they have not run the ball in those games. So they need the pass game to carry them. And right now, they're connecting on some deep shots, but they're not consistent. They're not clicking, and they're not really moving the chains with the passing game. And I think to your point, Kellen Mond had the worst game of his career. And I don't care how much pressure Clemson put on him. He could not complete a dump pass in that game. And Clemson, despite the complete ineptitude of Mond, could not take that and run away with the game in a way that any team really should against an offense that can't generate anything due to ineptitude. And to me, that says, if they played right now, I just don't see any way. I say don't see any way, but I don't see any way that Clemson should be favored over LSU or Alabama. And what they've done in the first 2 games, to me, hasn't been nearly as impressive as what LSU has done. And then Alabama's looked a lot cleaner in their wins than Clemson has.
For Georgia, Josh and I both had them at 4 with Oklahoma and kind of with Ohio State in that 4A, 4B, 4C. Teams that should be in playoff consideration right now but haven't really played anybody to show where they exactly should be, with opportunities coming up to prove exactly that. The audio got corrupted. We re-recorded but forgot to add Georgia in entirely. So our apologies there, but know that we have them right there with Ohio State and Oklahoma, and all three of those teams are right in there together. For my next two, I've got Oklahoma and then Ohio State, and these to me are very close. I have got Oklahoma ahead of Ohio State right now because I think both of these teams have actually improved defensively. I think Oklahoma has maybe improved more, and they had more to go. Their defense was not as good as Ohio State's last year. They had more to go. But I also feel like their offense is better than Ohio State's offense. And that's not totally fair because Ohio State put up plenty of points against Cincinnati, but we discussed this going into that game. I was not high on Cincinnati. I don't think they're very good. They struggle with UCLA, and I think Oklahoma wrecks UCLA this weekend. It's so bad. UCLA is so bad that we're not even doing a preview on that game. I don't think we might, but if it is, it's not going to be substantial. So right now, put those two teams on a neutral field. I give Oklahoma a slight edge, but it's very slight to me. These two teams are 4A and 4B. This might be, I'm not sure where you are, but this might be where the last place that we're aligned, and then we'll kind of vary going after that.
Yeah, and we are still aligned at this point. I have Oklahoma 4 and Ohio State 5, and basically the same points you had. Without stealing our thunder from the preview, which at this point we probably just aren't going to do. UCLA, they lose to San Diego State, and it was a San Diego State team that threw for 3.6 yards per attempt in a 6-0 win over Weber State in their opener, and they just thumped UCLA. So that's kind of where we were at with Cincinnati, and we said some things on Twitter, and I think kind of got verified that we didn't think this game should be close with Ohio State, and it wasn't. The issue for Ohio State isn't that they have any real major issues. It's just the other teams in front of them are really good, and I think Oklahoma's offense has so many weapons at so many different positions. Offensively, they're the best team in the country, and I don't know that it's particularly even close again. But defensively, they're good. They're still not quite as elite as the teams around them. That makes up for it, even though I think Ohio State's defense has a chance to be extremely good. I don't have a lot of confidence right now in Justin Fields' ability to operate play-to-play, drive-to-drive against an elite defense. That's pure supposition, but I've just seen enough personally where he's a little too quick to run, and he's missing some routine throws and reads. They're not hurting him because they can dump the ball off and get a first down without really needing a lot downfield. I think it may hurt him if he was in a playoff game right now. He's got a lot of time to improve, doesn't have a lot of experience. It may change, but that's why I have them at number 5 rather than Oklahoma at number 4.
For me, after that, I've got Notre Dame. And if I'm being honest, some of this might be influenced from last year. It is not because I think they'll end up at 5th because they have an easy schedule or hard schedule or whatever, which I hate when people rank teams in September because they see that they have a really easy schedule and might go undefeated. I'm not doing that with Notre Dame. I was actually really impressed with the Louisville game. I noted that last year Notre Dame in that type of game would have won by 6-8 points. They beat Vanderbilt by 1 score. They beat Ball State by 1 score. Louisville this year is better than either of those teams last year. Louisville is far better, I think, than they were last year. So for Notre Dame to go out, I think the score is 35-17. I don't remember. I could look it up, but I don't feel like it. That's a good win. I think that's a very clean win, a dominant win. They were trading punches early, but at the half, by the half or early in the third quarter, that game was over. So that's something that I've been wanting to see from Notre Dame. I saw it. I've got them right there. Obviously, they could slip, but I got mad respect for how they schedule. And for me, I think that's a fair nod for where we're at right now. 6 is where I got them. How about you? What's your 6th slot?
So my 6th slot right now is Texas. And yeah, it was a one-score loss to LSU. Partly, as I said, it's a little bit of a combination of showing how good you are and then proving how good you are in the field. It's easy to say, well, they're one score behind LSU. That's one, I will say that's one of those weird one-score things where Texas scored in a drive where they were forced to burn clock and take a two-score game to a one-score game. And two, when you look at the actual box score in that game, Ellinger's at like 8.5 yards per attempt, and Burrow's at a ridiculous 12 yard per attempt. LSU looked a lot better to me, frankly, than Texas did, even though it was a close game. I think Texas is still extremely good. It is not an insult to put someone number 6 in the country. I think they got a really good shot at making the playoffs if they beat Oklahoma. And in my view, if they beat Oklahoma, they could move up that list. I've got them only 2 slots apart right now. But they're young. I think the pass rush needs to improve. But offensively, they look really good. They're balanced. They're able to use their targets downfield. Ellinger looks a lot better. Defensively, they're aggressive, they're fast, they're big, and they're physical. And I don't think anybody even remotely looks as impressive as them defensively in the Big 12 or really offensively. They are just far more athletically impressive than anyone else in the conference. And again, just in general, be it LSU or Alabama or Clemson, if you had their guys stand up next to the guys on the other teams, they're really I would say, well, Ohio State also in that mix. They're really the only other team in the country that man-to-man looks like they belong with LSU, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State.
My number 7 is Texas, and both of us have them much higher than the AP poll voters because to have Texas right now means AP poll voters are lazy or ignorant or something. Again, we did a whole rant video on it. If you want to watch it, it's either out there or will be out there today. So check that out. But I've got them at 7. I think if you're one score behind the team that we currently have number 1, then look, this is the data we have up to this point. And I honestly, and I'll just kind of give a little preview. I don't have Florida. I do have Michigan, but I don't have Florida or Auburn in my top 10. I don't think either one of those teams beats Texas right now on a neutral field. I just don't. Now, it might turn out that LSU's trash, and that means by proxy, Texas might be not as good as we think. But for now, with the data that we have now, Texas number 7. My number 8 is Wisconsin. I think they look so much better offensively this year. Last year, they were struggling offensively with crappy teams. They were playing great defense last year and struggling with crappy teams, and a Heisman caliber running back still couldn't score, still couldn't pull away. They're handling their business right now, and I cannot believe that they're ranked behind Michigan. And I think that's, again, based on preseason polls that we don't properly reshuffle. But we're going to do a Michigan preview. I think next week is when we will do that preview. And right now, based on what I've seen, I think I would have Wisconsin winning that game. Tell me who you got in your next spot.
So for me, I'm on number 7, and my number 7 right behind Texas is Wisconsin. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I know they haven't played necessarily the best competition, but they've dominated that competition, and we're at the point now, I will say, where it starts tapering off in terms of quality compared to the teams above them. Quite frankly, when you look at LSU, Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Texas, all those teams are really, really high caliber teams in my mind. Wisconsin, I think, might be part of that group, but they haven't had any opportunity to truly prove it against a worthy team. South Florida wasn't very good. And then, obviously Central Michigan wasn't expected to be terribly good. But Wisconsin beat those teams like a good team should. They were dominant. They've struggled offensively and even somewhat defensively last year, and I'm not seeing any of those issues. They're a dominant run team. They're a balanced offense. They can control the line of scrimmage, and the defense is extremely good. I have Wisconsin number 7, and I agree with you that it's really, frankly, a crying shame that they're not being ranked ahead of Michigan. Not to, just rain on Michigan's parade, but Wisconsin deserves hype right now.
So honestly, for me, like if you look at the teams in the top maybe 5 or 6, once you get past that, it's really a crapshoot, and I think that there's so much drop-off after that it makes this really hard because maybe Auburn or Utah or one of these teams is top 10 worthy, but right now the gap between maybe 5 and 10 is the same to me from 10 to 30. So I've got Michigan at 9. Give me your 8 and 9, and then we'll wrap it up.
So
with
first,
10.
I do agree with the point. And by the way, I mean, that's the way it ended last year, right? In most advanced stats, it was the gap between like number 5 and number 10 was about the same from number 10 to like number 35. And that's just kind of been the way it is. But number 8 for me is UCF. I think UCF is flying way under the radar. They beat Florida Atlantic worse than Ohio State did. And I don't think they get nearly enough credit for that. We know Wimbush is a good quarterback. We saw him succeed at a high level at Notre Dame. So you can't even really use the excuse of, well, Wimbush is playing in a bad conference. He had some struggles at Notre Dame, but he was a good quarterback, and he was very successful. And then around him, they have a high-power offense, and the defense has been, admittedly against bad competition, but had been playing at a high level. So I do have UCF there at number 8. Number 9 for me is Notre Dame. I probably take a little bit more than you do from some of their early games. We only have one data point with them because of the bye, so it's really premature. But Notre Dame at number 9 is not an insult. That's still a very good team, but I saw some flaws. One, I didn't think Ian Book processed things nearly well enough, and maybe it's just rust, and my opinion may very well change in just a week or two. But I didn't think he was very effective in terms of his mental ability to process plays and get the ball out on time. And I thought defensively they were slow. When they played Louisville and Louisville was able to generate big plays, it tended to be because Louisville was able to dump the ball out and guys were able to hit a seam and get upfield quickly. And I just saw a general kind of surprising lack of athleticism from Notre Dame. And I will say Notre Dame is big and they're very physical. So if you're to talk like spark scores or that kind of thing, if you're into them, I think Notre Dame would test well, but they're a little too big, I think. And they would do well against some teams, but against some teams, I think, particularly really high power passing offenses, I think they could have major issues, like against an Oklahoma or an Alabama, or maybe even newfangled LSU, and then might strangely do better against Clemson because of their physicality. So that's why I have UCF 8 and then Notre Dame all the way down at 9.
I have UCF at 10, and I'm surprised that you have UCF ahead of Notre Dame, given that Wimbush lost the job to Ian Book because he was struggling so much at Notre Dame, and that offense really opened up once Ian Book came on, which to me, UCF I think will dominate their league, of course, but we do have to remember that Wimbush had plenty of opportunity, had plenty of tape at Notre Dame to take the reins and be the guy, and couldn't be the guy, and struggled against Ball State, and struggled against Vanderbilt. So for me, I do have them top 10 because I do think they would beat Florida. I think they would beat Auburn right now. I am encouraged by the FAU game. But we've also talked about this before where certain styles of offense, certain styles of quarterback do really well against really bad teams, and it doesn't, even on a curve, translate to better defenses. So for me, I've got them at number 10 behind a Michigan. This is another defense that Wimbush struggled with last year with better talent surrounding him to put up even, I think without that Hail Mary pass, they had like 17 points. So that's where I've got them at number 10, which is still right now higher than I think the AP polls got them, but that's where I got them.
So I'll defend my point on UCF before saying my number 10, and that's, UCF against Florida Atlantic. Wimbush did not play in that game due to an injury that kind of held him out. And the point to me is UCF beat Florida Atlantic worse than Ohio State did without using Wimbush and with using a guy that went 7 of 19 in that game. Just because their weapons were so fantastic. I mean, they were able to generate 13 yards per attempt with a quarterback that was struggling, really getting the ball, out consistently, and a rushing attack that was absolutely dominant in that game. So to me, it's not so much about Wimbush. I was just saying we know that they have an accomplished, capable quarterback. Not Milton was obviously elite, but it took a lot of time for people to accept it. But it's the overall package with UCF, the system they operate. And I think he's in a better position to succeed, frankly, at UCF than he was at Notre Dame. My number 10 is Washington State. So to me, Washington State is flying under the radar. They've looked pretty darn good in their opening 2 games. They have done everything that's been asked of them. And the biggest thing with me in Washington State is it's kind of a fun, if you want to call it sort of a fun honorary number 10 slot. Washington State has every ability to run the slate the rest of the way and make the playoff discussion. So again, 58-7, 59-17, really bad opponents, but they look fine and good. Leach has done miracles with this team before. They were extremely competitive last year. This year, you run down the schedule. They miss USC in the regular season, so they play UCLA, Houston, who we already know is bad. UCLA is terrible. Utah, that may be pretty good, but I don't know that they're deserving of, I think, their current number 11 ranking. Arizona State's terrible. Colorado is probably pretty good. Oregon at 15 is a maybe good team. Cal has a good defense, but is probably not overall good. Stanford, Oregon State, and then Washington to end the season. None of those teams are scary good, missing USC. The out-of-conference schedule is Cupcake City, but you could look at one loss or less. And so I think Washington State is sort of a dark horse to be in the playoff discussion at the end of the year, kind of by default. And right now, I don't see any reason, frankly, to put anybody else ahead of them.
Yeah, you're doing the thing that I already said that I can't stand, and that's ranking teams on potential to win a bunch of games because they have a trash schedule. I don't want to reward a team whose out-of-conference slate is Northern Colorado, New Mexico State, and Houston. I think that is pitiful, and Washington State's been doing this for a while. They complained last year that they weren't more in title contention, playoff contention. Play a Power 5 team out of conference. And, I know that it's hard in terms of traveling, getting people to come to Pullman and don't want to do home and homes. People don't want to do home and homes. Do a neutral site game. Play a mid-level Power 5 team. You don't have to play Alabama. You don't have to play Clemson, but play somebody. Northern Colorado isn't going to get it done. It's just not. You'll notice the lack of having Auburn and Florida in here. We discussed this more at length in our Texas rant about them being number 12. I don't think they're playing top 10 football right now. Florida's big win was over Miami, who just lost to North Carolina, who I don't think is very good. And Auburn looked really bad offensively in both their games this year. I do think they have a top 10, maybe if we're ranking them, 8th best defense and probably 60th best offense. Utah, for me, is just a blah team. I don't think they're a top 10 team. I think that they would lose to Texas. I think they'd lose to Notre Dame. They had a win that they pulled away late. I think it was 21-17 against NIU, and NIU struggled to beat Illinois State. I mean, these are not good opponents. These are not good games. They struggled with BYU. Again, they pulled away late, beat BYU. BYU should have lost to Tennessee Saturday. So there's nothing to me that screams Utah's a top 10 team. So I don't have them in there either. Anything else on these top 10s? We may not do these every week. They take a long time. And when there's more games to talk about, we might not do one of these. But since you've got a captive audience on a top 10 discussion, anything else?
No, I think that's it. And I think you could have a rotating door at number 10. Like you said, we're doing 10 teams each, which means we have 20 things to talk about. And even in 30 minutes, that's giving us about 90 seconds per team to discuss it each. I think it'll be interesting, and this list is certainly going to change over the course of the season. Some teams like Auburn may gel and turn. I'll be curious if their quarterback situation changes or they sort of have to tweak that offense. But right now, it's funny to me that you complain about me putting Washington State where they are based off their opponents and where they're doing. But the whole problem is I don't want to reward Washington State, but it's hard for me to reward Michigan for nearly losing to Army. I mean, it once you hit – both of us, I know, had the same point. Once we hit number 10, we kind of ended up scratching our head because I think right now there's really only, at both of our view, 9 teams that are really at that level in college football, 9 to 10. And everybody that didn't make this list in our viewpoint, frankly, isn't really particularly close to making this list. Or if they did make the list, there's no way they'd be any higher than 10 or 9.
All right, y'all, that's our top 10 for this week. Again, we may not do these every week. We like discussing them. It's fun because it allows us to hit a bunch of teams and sort of kind of capture the entire landscape of college football, at least at the top. Remember, I don't know if all of y'all know this, but we do a podcast version. It's on iTunes. It's in Google Play. It may take a couple more days to get there because We have big kid jobs, so we can't always get right on it on Monday, but they will be out there probably by Wednesday for you to check them out if you prefer an audio-only version. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.